it's great to be able to chat with you all today. As Carter mentioned, a lot of times when you're thinking about utilities, innovation isn't necessarily something that comes to mind. But I'm going to take some time to talk about really, the transformation that's going on in the utility industry and some of the innovation that's coming utilities' ways, and really partnerships and opportunities. Now, a lot of the buzz I think that's going on in the energy industry right now is around startups, right? I mean, there are a lot of different companies getting into this space, getting involved with what's going on, and it's really creating a lot of buzz and energy. So I always like to try to do a little bit of audience interaction here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a startup that's right here in Atlanta. It's a pretty cool startup, and I want to see if any of you are familiar with who this startup is. All right. So it's a community-driven energy startup that was created by the citizens of Atlanta. It owns 940 kilowatts of generation resources in downtown Atlanta. Half of the generation is dedicated to the electric mobility needs of Atlanta neighborhoods. And there's an Atlanta investor, Henry Atkinson, who's invested in this. Any guesses on who this startup is? Okay. I knew someone was going to say that. Well, it's a little bit of a trick question. So by e-mobility, I mean electric streetcars. And the year that I was really talking about was 1891. And the answer is correct. It's the foundation of Georgia Power, which is now a very large utility company, part of Southern Company. And when utility companies are starting out, they had to invest. They were disrupting this industry, bringing electricity to the marketplace. Now, what they ended up doing and what they've had to do for the past 100 years or so is really work within a specific framework, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that change. Uh-oh. One of my slides is missing. I love PowerPoint sometimes. But what I'm going to do is talk about that change that's going on in the industry, how utilities are really evolving in this space, and why this innovation that they're looking at right now is starting to become more and more entrepreneurial. It's almost like they're going back to their roots and really having to figure out, new business models and new ways to grow. So when we talk about innovation, there are a lot of different definitions out there, right? So when I started to look at this study or this talk, I was thinking, okay, all right, let's frame what innovation is before we talk about how utilities are innovating. And when you look at innovation, my go-to source, as with a lot of people, is to Google it. And the first thing that came up was that innovation is the action or process of innovating. I was like, thanks, Google. I'm actually going to have to scroll down a little bit more. And when I did that, I found that there were some different aspects to it, right? The introduction of something new, this new method or device, a novelty. And I thought, well, that's not just innovation. That's different ideas, coming up with new concepts. And I really like this definition from Fast Company that talks about innovation being the process through which value is created to a community of users. So let's think about innovation as we talk about utilities in that context. All right, so once utilities kind of got past that disruption phase, electricity wasn't just a fad, something that became embedded in society. Utilities were regulated, right? Most of them. And their core business was relatively well-defined and evolving somewhat slowly. So utilities, when they were really looking at innovation, they were looking at innovation around this core business and these models that they understood. And so what did that mean? It was a lot of this incremental innovation, right? Driving operational efficiencies, because at the end of the day, they're working on delivering reliable service. They're working on delivering affordable service to their customers. So those examples of innovation, and you're really starting to see those take off in terms of the digital side, in the past 10 to 15 years, right? So AMI meters, new communication networks, new data and analytics, new software systems like MDM, right? So there were all these sorts of incremental improvements and changes that utilities are making. And as they were doing that, I think it's interesting to think about the partnerships. How are they traditionally driving innovation within their organizations? I did a couple interviews for a forthcoming public utilities fortnightly article, and we were talking about, okay, well, how did you innovate, over time, over the past decades? And CPS Energy, which is based in San Antonio, Exelon Utilities that is a parent company for utilities like ComEd, Baltimore Gas and Electric. They said, hey, we traditionally innovated by purchasing products and services from our vendors, right? It was this one-way relationship. We were looking to outside vendors to come in and provide us with new technologies and growth for operational efficiency. Well, as those technologies and devices were coming out onto the grid, all that automation, all that data and analytics really started to create a different environment for utilities on top of all this other digitization that's going on right now. So utilities, along with all these other changes that are happening, started to create a different sort of model for utilities. Things that started to get into the clean space, distributed energy, intelligent energy, more mobile energy. And with that kind of traditional utility business model that we've seen started to evolve. So utilities moved from that framework of relatively known processes and efforts into something that at Navigant we really call the energy cloud. And there it's all these different players that are having to get together, right? Working on e-mobility, building to grid technologies, smart cities. And so suddenly this environment that utilities found to be fairly certain and secure is rapidly changing and evolving. And that changes the way that utilities are really going about innovation. So when you look at innovation within this new business model, you see that key value. I mean, there still has to be that reliability, right? There still has to be security. But there's all of this new value that can be created in new products and services. Greenhouse gas emissions reductions, sustainability, resiliency. I think it's been really cool to go to some conferences over the past year where you've really seen utility executives start to talk about GHG, climate change in a very open way, and talking about how some of these changes need to happen. And so those innovations are not just the technology, but really changing platforms, right? New business models. And this creates new opportunities, new value. This is a slide deck that we have, and there's some dollar figures associated with this. I didn't want to throw those up there and kind of distract from the basic premise here, but essentially what is happening as these platforms are growing, as the market is changing, is that there's new value and new opportunity to be captured in this space, particularly at that customer level. Well, there's all this opportunity and new value. What happens? There are a lot of different companies that want to go after that. And I talked at the beginning about startups and entrepreneurs, but there are a lot of big companies that are going after this, right? Amazon, Google, Total, Shell, they are all looking at how they can get involved in this space and potentially own this space. This is all up for grabs. So this is something that I sketched out a couple years ago, really thinking about kind of this evolution, right? So for a long time, there were some blips and changes in the utility space, but really what we're starting to see now with kind of that investment in smart grid and AMI meters really taking off, and it's starting to create some of this chaos, confusion in the marketplace. Who's going to be the owner of some of these technologies and business models? And I find it honestly pretty exciting to have this uncertainty because it's an opportunity to rethink how some of these traditional business models have been put together. And it's really thinking about new partnerships and how do we all work together to essentially create what's next. So I think it's interesting here to see those same utilities, and I also threw in a quote from Gil Quiones, who is the head of NYPA in New York. I saw him last week speaking at an event. And so now that innovation isn't about just purchasing products and services from different vendors. It is really about working together with all these different partners that are out there to help co-create this future, right? Because it's still being defined, and people really need to be working together to do this. So, that's my little stumps, or me getting up with my little speech. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how utilities are actually working through this, because there are great examples of what's going on right now. One is Rev Connect. Has anyone heard of Rev Connect or Rev in New York State? All right, we had one person there. So we got one back there. All right, good. Well, Rev Connect there's Rev, which is a thing called Reforming the Energy Vision. And it was put out by New York State saying, hey, we have these aggressive goals, right? We want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We want to rely more on renewables. And to do that, we really have to change our business model and how utilities function. Essentially having them move to more of this platform model that enables all of these market players to be able to engage and interact with one another. Well, they put this out there and wanted to set up some great demonstration projects. Well, they had a lot of great ideas, but they found that the utilities weren't necessarily well equipped to handle all these ideas. It was overwhelming, trying to balance all of this. So New York State said, hey, we have to rethink how we do partnerships, business models, how do we change that? And with that, they came up with Rev Connect, which is essentially a facilitation process that works to connect market players with utilities. I have a little innovation sprint sign up there, and they really do these innovation sprints where they have a certain topic. They say, hey, we need some help around things like connected utilities. And utilities come out and say, this is what we need. Market players say, this is what we have. And they really work together to refine that and actually test business models as opposed to testing technologies. So if you have something that you're looking to actually partner with utilities in New York State around, Rev Connect is a great opportunity to be able to do that. Other ways that utilities are rethinking things. One example is Enel, which is an Italian utility company, really getting more into the energy services space. And their approach is really to get more engagement around e-mobility and DER integration. So they went out and acquired various companies and developed different partnerships to really start to build out those services and say, hey, we can provide this. We can engage with the community on this. Another piece is just rethinking community partnerships. One of my favorite examples is from CPS Energy in San Antonio. And they came out with a concept they called Epicenter. So CPS Energy is, I think, the largest municipally owned utility company in the US. And they really have a commitment to developing the community in San Antonio and giving new business opportunities. So they partnered with some of their technology companies that they've worked with and have essentially a startup and innovation accelerator. They have a fabrication lab, they have a think tank, really all these different ways to engage the community, get them involved, get new ideas, and hopefully really start to implement some of them within CPS. Another example is ComEd in Chicago and Exelon Utilities more broadly. They developed this concept of the utility of the future. And like Rev Connect, it's really about building this platform with which all these different market players can participate in. And really kind of a realization of that is the Bronzeville community of the future. And there they have a microgrid that they're working on. They're testing out a lot of different technologies that you can see here. But it's really trying to actually put that in an actual environment and see how all of it works together. And last but not least, I think this is a pretty provocative one, is National Grid with their launch of National Grid Partners. Now, as I was looking into this, I heard a little bit about it last week. And as I was looking into it, I just decided I needed to put their whole description up there because I thought this was really a different way for utility companies to think. And you can see here that they talk about how they're really looking to disrupt National Grid itself. They realize we need to change, we have to start doing things differently. And not only do they want to disrupt National Grid, but they also want that opportunity to disrupt the energy industry more broadly, bring about the realization of smart cities, e-mobility. And what National Grid Partners does is essentially invest in different technology companies. And this is their portfolio of technology companies right now. And so they either help startups grow, they help mid-sized companies really be able to expand, and they ultimately want to be able to use those new technologies and opportunities in National Grid itself, and also be able to use those technologies more broadly in the energy industry. So all the examples that I gave you were really kind of this new business model, this new way of thinking about innovation, right? And there's always this question of, well, do we focus on the new business models, or do we focus on our current business models? So we did a survey recently where we asked that question of utilities and regulators. And nearly, very few people, 3.5%, said, we really need to double down. We got to focus on current business models, and we're not going to invest in those new business models. Well, 27% said we got to shift to new business models, right? Limited investment in the current business model. So what did the other 70% say? They said we have to focus on both, right? So now utilities are trying to both, literally keep the lights on at their organizations, provide reliable, affordable power to people, but also trying to create, new businesses, new opportunities, and be able to balance that. And that's definitely, a challenge to try to be able to do those both, particularly when everyone is essentially relying on you to deliver power. So with that kind of creates that dual innovation challenge, right? So focusing on the current business model requires reliability, but focusing on the future business really requires agility. So being able to find that balance again is something that utilities are faced with, and they're trying to sort out right now. And so with that, I wanted to do a little bit of a group exercise, just to have a conversation. Before we do that, though, are there any questions around some of the basics of what I presented? Everyone's just blown away by my amazing insights. All right. Well, I think in the spirit of co-creation, and really designing what's next, as I've talked with utilities, they've said, okay, we want to partner more, right? We want to get people more involved. So, what I'm going to do is I'll have you split out in just a second, but I have 3 questions I want to look at. One is, how do utilities really balance, those core business needs with future business needs? What are your ideas around that? I'd love to hear a couple. Number 2 is, how can utilities be better co-creators of the future? When I was at my lunch table today and I told them what I was presenting about, they kind of laughed and said, okay, utilities, we don't see them being huge partners in some of the things that we're doing. But I'd love to hear some more about maybe what are some of the challenges, right? What are some of the issues that are being faced? And then 3, how can utility partners be better co-creators of the future? So, a lot of you are really drawing from this utility data, leveraging it in a lot of different ways. How could you as a partner be able to co-create better with utilities? Maybe, what can you bring to the table in terms of conversations? So does that make sense? Anyone have questions around the questions themselves? Okay. All right, so what I want everyone to do is to find a partner to chat with. It'd be great if it's someone that you don't know. So what I'd like you to do is meet up with a partner, and maybe we section it off this way, where this sort of group right here, you focus on question 1. So really talking about how do organizations kind of balance that the core business and sort of being innovative. Does that question make sense overall? Okay, so kind of mingle within this area and find someone to chat with about that. Group number 2 right here, how can utilities be better co-creators of the future? I want you to just take a few minutes to chat about that. And then group number 3 is a little small. You guys got it though. Group number 3, focus in on how partners can be better co-creators of the future and really drive this innovation. So we'll take just a few minutes here, find a partner, chat a little bit about it, introduce yourselves, and we'll report back here in just a moment. Is it okay if I use this microphone while I have this mic? Will it? I can't use both, right? That will make it go. Okay, so I'll probably just, if I can do this one while I'm getting audience questions and getting feedback from people, that would be. Yeah, I'll take it. Or actually, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I'll do that. All right, thank you. All right, so take about 1 more minute, and then we'll report out. All right, so let's wind down those conversations. And we'll get started here in a moment. Okay. So let's start with this group number 1 over here. Question number 1. How do organizations go through and balance some of those core needs with those future needs, right? So, and if you can get in that utility mindset, right, of putting yourself in their shoes, what are some of those things? Do we have any volunteers to share what you talked about? All right. Let me bring up a mic for you. Okay.
One of the things that we talked about, it's great to look at sustainability, but a lot of our clients have to make a profit. And so the number one initiative they'll look at is the business case. If you can implement a sustainable measure and it has a good business performance, good ROI, then that's something that could achieve both of these objectives.
Yeah, so really finding that balance of, okay, do we have a case for this, right? For doing this innovation, how do we drive that forward? So excellent, that's awesome. I'm gonna creep up here. All right, love it.
So I used to work for a utility, gas utility.
Yeah.
And I will say that it's pretty simple. There always has to be a business case, but another reason they'll look at the future business needs is the public utility side doesn't necessarily have to be the non-regulated, non-public utility side. So for instance, a large utility can be owned by an even larger corporation. So it makes a lot of business sense actually to have that regulated utility, which has a regulated profit, and then own perhaps their disruptive competitor, because now whatever the future holds, the profit could grow on that disruption and it benefits them. If things stay stable for a long time, they still have that utility side as well. So I think the balance is a natural business decision for them, especially a utility that's owned by a larger corporation that can basically have separate entities. And then the cooperation between those could be completely siloed, meaning no cooperation, meaning they own two companies that essentially compete with each other, or they can have, I guess, creative way. There are regulations, so you can't necessarily have a regulated utility working with a non-regulated utility exactly, but they can still have more cooperation between them.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think there are different ways that people are kind of approaching that. And it depends on obviously the utility, the regulatory structure, their drivers, all of that. But yeah, that was awesome. Any other? I bet you had some good insights here.
Just another perspective in terms of how data plays into different decisions people make. Is any argument you have is all the more powerful with data. That's pretty much what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's great. All right, definitely some great ideas there. Okay, so question number 2: how can utilities be better co-creators of the future? Anyone want to volunteer? Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Schick with Avid Exchange. So you got to hear Mike Prager speak earlier this morning, most of you, I think. What we were really talking about is how Avid Exchange focuses on the bill pay solution and thinking about how, even with UrgentNet services and how they help us extract and gather the data from utility companies, thinking about how utilities can really better understand the needs of the consumer, whether that's an individual user, a business, UrgentNet's connections, to more standardized data and digitalize it so it's easier for us to capture, for UrgentNet to capture, and really work off of it across all the use cases that UrgentNet has really framed for us today.
Yeah, I was talking with someone earlier today about, kind of that, standardization and that ability to actually make those exchanges of information, how that can be really powerful in opening new interactions that may not have taken place before. All right, everyone looks really scared. How about from this group?
Sure.
This group?
So I actually work for an energy utility. Within our innovation group, I work as a solution developer. So we kind of talk in this space pretty much every day. This is my entire job. And one of the things that we've been talking about pretty regularly about when we're talking about the industry getting disrupted and how we can disrupt ourselves rather than essentially losing all of our customers because they've been captive customers for so long, is to change the way that we talk about our customers. It was maybe 10 years ago when utilities still referred to their customers as meters rather than people. And they are people, and people have a voice, and people have problems and needs, and really just making sure that we are proactively going out to try and understand the customer's needs rather than assume that you understand the customer problem, trying to be as proactive as possible. That's one of the big things that we're trying to change culturally within our company and kind of with everyone that we work with on a daily basis.
No, that's awesome. I mean, really that thinking about the customer piece. And I feel like, a lot of things that have been talked about here today are obviously very customer, focused and driven. So that's good. All right, I'm getting some warning signs here on time. So we're going to get to group number 3. Okay. Someone got called out.
In the short time we had, we didn't come up with any lightning bolts here, but I think the one thing we thought about around utility partners was trying to figure out how to provide more transparency in the data and education around the data utility providers are providing us. So I don't know that a lot of people kind of really look at it and really truly understand it, especially in the consumer space. So just educating consumers about what they're looking at and how it works, and I think that would be a value added, process. And
Well, that's great.
Yeah, I actually work in the retail energy space, so I have a ton of experience with working with utilities. And I got advice a long time ago that utilities have like a 40 or 50-year horizon on investments they're making. So understanding that like what I think is fast is a couple months to go to market, and for them it's could be years. So trying to find the balance between those things, and then also finding opportunities to help bolster existing programs. So one good example is with utility rebates. We've worked directly with the utility on behalf of our customers to basically help streamline that experience, so customer doesn't have to wait 6 weeks, fill out a paper form, and just wait for a check to arrive. Like that's really clunky. So we just finding those opportunities and being patient with what you're trying to accomplish.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So I think we're probably out of time here, but I love this. I love the concepts around customers, around data, around transparency, which it seems like, from my experience here today, I mean, that's what you all are working on. So, really continuing to do that, I think, is going to be a huge effort and really a great opportunity, to be able to engage with utilities more and really kind of create more of this future and help visualize it a little bit more. So I appreciate everyone taking the time to participate in that exercise, and I will turn it back over to Carter.
Oh, I didn't know if we still got 5 minutes.
Oh, I thought we were all done. I was like, whew. No. Questions? Any questions or any other comments that we have? Yeah. So in terms of energy infrastructure partners, what would be? Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that, companies and BC companies, I mean, all of them really see opportunities for investment, right? So I think that, like we were talking about earlier, about, kind of this long-term reliability of energy, right? I mean, that's important, but it's definitely changing. There are a lot of needs around energy storage, DERs, and then getting into, some of these transformative technologies and platforms. So yeah, I definitely think, there's a lot of interest there. And National Grid was definitely, with their National Grid partners, making a bold statement like, hey, we're making investments in these. And you're also seeing a lot of European utilities. So I had Enel, Engie, they're very aggressively going out and, acquiring companies, investing in them. And so, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of investment taking place in this space. Other questions? Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean, that's a great question. And definitely, startups, I mean, they can go dump, scooters across sidewalks, right? And they're not getting major fines from, regulators saying, oh, you can't do that, at least not yet. But utilities, they do have that spotlight, right? And they're responsible for everyone. And I think that's where that Rev Connect example is very interesting, because that was something that came out of the state, working with the regulators. And from that effort, they actually implemented a new, RFP process where, startups and utilities, they work together to kind of co-create this future. And it's something that's actually sponsored, by the state and generally supported by the regulators. So, doing some of that, I think, has been really helpful there. We're also seeing some other things in New York State. We have a utility we're working with there, and they're really focused around, we've been working on more storytelling, right? Talking about this change that's going on, talking about this experimentation that's happening, And just really telling that story can be very powerful. Like, hey, this is something that customers are interested in. Here's what we're working on. Here's how we're trying to move forward. So I think, being able to share those stories of success and how change is taking place has been really powerful for some utilities as well, as they're kind of, dealing with that regulatory piece, right? And trying to work with the regulators. So it's definitely evolving. Okay, all right, so now I'm done. All right, so now I can leave you guys off stage. So thank you so much again for your time. Really appreciate it.